Hey everyone, welcome back to the lab. In this video, we're going to be talking about simple, scalable systems and how to find 80-20 silver bullet solutions for any domain. So simple scalable systems, or 3S as I call them, are the only systems that scale. This is why I talk about them so much and why my mission in life and in my business and on this blog is to develop and share simple scalable systems for 1% improvements, because really they're the only way that I found to perpetually, consistently, over time and across scenarios get 1% improvements. And I think, a rising tide lifts off all ships. If we can make everything a little bit more efficient, everything gets a little bit better. And so in this post, I'm going to define what simple scalable systems are. The general gist being that they're a 3S heuristic for identifying these 80-20 silver bullets in any domain. Okay, let's talk about simple scalable systems. So a simple scalable system, 3S, is an 80-20 solution for some problem in some domain. Now, it won't necessarily be the best solution, but it's a solution that works so well and with such a low cost that its ROI makes it a great candidate in most cases. And the reason that this is often useful is you can imagine that for any one use case, you can optimize it to be the very best. But usually if you're optimizing for one use case, it's not going to be generalizable across other use cases. This is like if you're doing ML models, this might be like the overfitting thing. Like it's really great for this data set that you've created for this one very particular use case, but as soon as you try to use it for other things, it's typically going to get worse. But the beauty of a solution that is very good in most cases is that you can continually to reuse it across things in that domain. You can go back and improve it. And so it's basically a system of systems that gets really good, consistent returns for low cost, which over time usually beats out any one of those overfitted solutions that optimize for one use case. That's the idea. And so the very name Simple Scalable System is itself a 3S heuristic for evaluating solutions for whether it has the potential to be an 80-20 silver bullet for a given domain. And so these heuristics are based off my own experience analyzing, building, and reflecting on systems, a lot of which I share here, across a multitude of different problems, solutions, and the different outcomes that they get, both near-term and long-term. And so these heuristics should be, familiar by now. And so the first one is simple. And so this basically means that it needs to be something that is low cost and easy to build, but also low cost and easy to run. And so we're trying to find something that is simple, low cost, short term. So like, implementing directly, but also long term over time. We want to kind of minimize our overhead over time because that's drag on whatever else we're trying to do. The next heuristic is that it's scalable. And so this is scalable in a few ways. So the first is that it's going to need to work across scenarios large and small. So can it work for, we just need to do this thing for, let's say 10. Can it also scale up to work for something of 1 million, units or whatever. But that kind of like large and small, how does it scale that way? But also scalable in terms of the scenarios it can cover. So again, we don't want to get that overfitting problem where it's only really good at one thing. We actually want it to be very good across many things because we know that inevitably change will happen. And so if we're overfitted on one, as soon as something changes, which it will, it's now going to be hard to, change again. And so we want it to be scalable, large and small, but also flexible so it can kind of move in a different dimension as soon as things change and it needs to. The next is system. And really what we're talking about here is this thing systemic? And so the idea is when we come across this thing that's very simple and that it's scalable, does it consistently solve this problem across time so we can let it and it'll run well across a long period of time? Across iterations, can we repro this? Can we keep using this over and over and implementing and using? And does it work across varying scenarios consistently? Because if it does this, then we can continue redeploying this every time we find a problem like this, a domain like this, and reap the rewards of, the system we've built basically every time we see this. And together, if your thing does this, then it is a simple scalable system and it should be this 80-20 silver bullet that you have. And so in my experience, simple scalable systems are the only kinds of systems that scale. Solutions that don't fit 3S tend to fail in common recurring patterns. And so if it's not 3S, it doesn't mean it's not a good solution for this use case. It just means it might not be as portable and reusable and good enough to like have in your toolbox to consistently redeploy every time you see this. And so it might be worth shopping around for a different one. And so here's the common recurring patterns I see for things that do not fit 3S. So the first is, what if it's not simple? So if it's not simple, it's going to cost a lot to implement. So it might just be harder to get started, and or it's going to slow us down long term because it might have overhead. So obviously if it's like hard to get started, this is going to like cost us time. It's going to cost us upfront money or resources, whatever it is, just harder to actually get going. That's like a big obstacle. If it's got long-term overhead, that's going to be a drag on our team, whether it's, again, money, or oftentimes the way that we see it in software is like mental overhead. This thing was complex, and so it might have been easy to implement to start with, but like every time we have to touch the system later on, we're like causing bugs and we're losing out for the next iterations. So if it's not simple, this tends to be how things fail. Okay, so what if it's not scalable? So if it's not scalable, basically what you're gonna have to do is as soon as the scale changes, if we're talking kind of like performance scale, small, large scale, not scalable, then we basically have to redo it as soon as that scale changes. And so obviously not all scenarios are gonna go from large to small scale or back again, but oftentimes they do. Life goes in normal patterns, and it's always like expansion, contraction for the most part. And so if you don't have a system that's scalable, you're basically choosing to go with the thing that will require to be redone again, which, in some cases makes sense, but often if we can avoid it, that's probably the right choice. The other problem is if it's not flexible, so even if it is good, small, large scale, if it's not flexible, then again, when things inevitably change, because they do, and we need to change it, then we're gonna have to redo that thing. And if we haven't made it flexible in the first part, then we've got to redo the whole thing, and it's going to be expensive for the same reason. And finally, if it's not systemic, then we basically can't take all the stuff we've built and learned in the previous thing and reapply them to the next thing. And this basically means that we have to re-incur the cost of everything we did, because we can't just like come back and redeploy. And again, this won't matter in a single use case. But oftentimes, if you see something once, it's going to happen again. And it's those nth use cases that often are where you get the most benefits, because you can reuse all the work that you did originally. And so that's what happens when it's not systemic. We've got this, let's say, bespoke piece of software. It only works for this one thing. We can't just like plug and play again over here. And so now all of that stuff that we did previously is kind of lost because we can't use it again. It's not systemic. And so now I want to share some examples of simple scalable systems to try and make this a little bit more concrete. And so simple scalable systems 3S exist everywhere. They are simply effective patterns that are quite good in their domains. And so just as there are beginner tips for every video game, there's always some things that are better to do, some things that are worse to do, but everything has trade-offs, it all has an asterisk, but in general, that's like correct. So too are there 3S in every real life domain. And so I'm going to give you some examples from different domains that I consider to be 3S to give you some ideas of these things that are 80-20 silver bullets. They're not the best at everything or usually any one thing, but they are very, very good choices across most scenarios in this domain. So let's talk about the first one, not software related, and that's just personal investments. Long term, the general advice, the general 3S, is to just use index funds. They're very simple and accessible to most people. They're extremely low cost, and they outperform about 80% of alternatives over time. This is not investment advice, but you can read all my thoughts here. Okay, if we go to the domain of software architectures, when we think about what is an actual good software architecture for most use cases, monoliths basically always comes out on top. Why? Because they are actually very scalable. They can go from very low scale to very high scale. They do that with very low initial and ongoing costs in terms of server money, actual developers needed to build this thing, and also mental complexity over time, which, over time and at scale is the number one biggest thing that hurts software. And so it's not going to be the best for every use case, for every architecture. It probably won't be the best for any one architecture, but over time across domains, this is basically the thing that works best. Can read more about that here. Next thing is a very common one. Like if you're just trying to connect thing or patch something up very fast in the real world, use duct tape. It's basically waterproof for some amount of time. It's very flexible. It's very easy to get your hands on. It's extremely cheap. it's duct tape. Okay, the next one is like finding good ideas. And this is kind of like good business ideas, but it actually scales towards good ideas of any kind. So, simple scalable system inside of a simple scalable system. And that's the idea of small bets. So you actually can't determine if an idea is good or not until you test it in the real world. And so the best way to go about this to find what is actually good is to try many things in the real world, hopefully with a very small bet, and then double down on the things that works. This works across business, software projects, shares, blog posts, videos, like basically anything. This is how it goes. And this also works at scale. This is basically how, Meta, Instagram, Facebook, etc. do experiments and how they decide what features are good or not. It's small bets. And then finally, we'll talk about, gaining alignment across stakeholders. What is the easiest way to do this? The best way I've ever found this is to just create hypotheses on everything you're trying to do to clarify the goals, what you're trying to accomplish, the blockers that are getting in the way, and therefore the things that you need to do, and your plan to go about it. This cuts through a lot of cruft, a lot of back and forth. Are there better ways to go about it? Sure, but most of them are way more heavyweight. And so this is the simple scalable system for getting everyone on the same page as fast as possible. Next. So simple scalable systems are not the best choice for everything. And honestly, they're not the best choice for any one thing. There's almost always going to be a better thing that better optimizes for a single scenario. But 3S are great at most things, which allows you to get good results. Let's call it a B plus, maybe a B minus, with very minimal effort. So you can move on to focus on those things that actually matter and ensure you get an A plus in those. And it's kind of one of those things that like, you can't really get an A plus in everything, because if you do that, you're probably sacrificing on something else that you're not measuring. And it's going to be like, your health, your happiness, whatever it is. And so the answer to optimizing for life, for business or impact, it's like never to do more work, but it's almost always to just prioritize better on the things that matter. And so basically the idea behind simple scalable systems is it allows you to do those things that don't really matter very well, but with minimal effort, so that you can use the extra slack you have to make sure that you're sustainably getting A pluses and the things that actually matter to you. And so, this isn't the best for any one use case, but over time and on balance and across many projects and across time, this is the solution. This is the system that does better and tends to be the best choice in aggregate, on balance, big picture, if that makes sense. And so if you like this post, you might also like simple scalable systems for building projects. 3 areas I'm exploring to build more side projects faster and cheaper in 2024. You might also be interested in simple scalable systems for building web-based projects, and why you should choose HTMX for your next web-based side project and ditch the crufty multi-page application and complex single-page application. And finally, you might be interested in simple scalable systems for cloud web hosting, how I host my server-side rendered F# site, this one, on Google Cloud for less than $1 per month. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.